I can still hear the echo of my husband's laugh, that soft, almost careless chuckle that sliced through me like a blade. Oops, guess we miscounted. Those words meant to sound light-hearted were anything but. They clung to me in that Roman restaurant, heavier than the chandeliers that sparkled above our table, louder than the polite laughter that followed. There was no seat for me, no place setting, no acknowledgement that I belonged. For a few agonizing seconds, I stood frozen, surrounded by 12 pairs of eyes, some wide with shock, others narrowed with barely concealed delight. The humiliation coursed through me like fire, but strangely, I didn't cry. My chest burned. My pulse raced, yet an eerie calm began to wrap itself around me like a cold cloak. I looked at my husband, Sean, the man I had once trusted with everything, and for the first time I saw him clearly, not as my partner, not as the boyish charmer who had pursued me years ago, but as an actor in a play I had not written. He was performing following a script carefully designed by his family. And in that moment, I realized I had been cast as the disposable character. Seems I'm not family. The words left my lips steadier than I expected. They hung in the air, slicing through the false warmth of the room. For just a second, I saw the smile falter on Eleanor's face, my mother-in-law, the queen of this elaborate performance. And then I turned, lifting my chin, my dignity, my only armor, and walked out. My hands shook as I pushed through the doors of the restaurant, stepping into the cool Roman night. But not from weakness. No, my trembling came from the storm inside me. Rage, betrayal, grief, but also something else. Resolve. I pulled my phone from my bag and the glow of the screen lit my face as I opened the event management app that had built my career, the very tool that had made me indispensable in Boston's high society. I had 30 minutes before they realized what I was doing. 30 minutes to unravel the web they had spun so carefully around me. And 30 minutes was more than enough. But maybe I should start at the beginning. Because if you don't understand where I came from, you might think I was just another bitter wife lashing out in desperation. But this was never desperation. This was reclamation. My name is Anna Morgan Caldwell. Or at least that's what it used to be. Before Rome, before betrayal carved scars into my soul, I was just Anna Morgan. Daughter of a working-class family, a girl who believed hard work could buy you not just success, but respect. 5 years earlier, I was at the top of my game, the founder of Elite Affairs, Boston's most sought-after event planning company. Every glittering gala, every flawless wedding, every perfectly orchestrated corporate gathering, it had my fingerprints all over it. I built that business from scratch. I put myself through business school, worked nights, lived off coffee and determination. My reputation was built not just on creating beautiful events, but on discretion. People trusted me with their secrets, their ambitions, their image. And in a city like Boston, that meant everything. That's how I met Sean Caldwell. It was at a charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital, one of the biggest events I had ever pulled off at the time. The ballroom of the Four Seasons shimmered with crystal chandeliers, cascading orchids, and a soft golden glow that made every guest look like royalty. I remember standing at the edge of the room, clipboard in hand, double-checking every detail when he approached me. "So you're the wizard behind all this," he'd said, his voice low and amused, as his eyes swept across the transformed space. He was tall with perfectly combed dark hair, and that confident smile the kind men are born into when they've never had to worry about money. Yet there was something genuine in the way he looked at me, as if he wasn't just impressed by the decor, but by me. "My mother has been searching for someone to plan her charity function next month," he added, his tone smooth. "I think I just found her answer." That job led to another, and soon I was the go-to planner for the Caldwell family. They were Boston aristocracy, their wealth tracing back generations to shipping and railroads. Old money. The kind of wealth that never needed to shout it, whispered through the quality of their tailoring, the art on their walls, the subtle way they looked at outsiders. Our romance began 6 months later. Sean pursued me with a determination that disarmed me. He seemed different from the rest of his family, more open, less chained to status. I wanted to believe that love could bridge the gap between where I came from and the gilded world he inhabited. So when he proposed less than a year later, I said yes. Despite the warning signs, despite the icy way Eleanor looked at me, her smile never reaching her eyes. Self-made success is so American, she had remarked at our first dinner together, her tone dipped in disdain. I brushed it off. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, Sean loved me, didn't he? Our wedding was the event of the season. I planned much of it myself, because how could I trust anyone else with my own day? Eleanor had opinions on everything. The venue wasn't traditional enough, the menu too bold, the guest list incomplete. Sean played mediator, but I noticed something then. He never contradicted his mother. Not directly. After the vows, the real battle began. At family events, my ideas were dismissed or co-opted. My profession was treated like a quaint hobby never quite good enough for their world. Anna has such a good eye for these things, Eleanor would tell her friends, patting my hand as if I were a child showing off a school project. And Sean. He told me not to take it personally. But it was personal. Every cutting remark, every exclusion, it chipped away at me until I barely recognized the confident woman who had built an empire from nothing. So when Eleanor's 70th birthday came and I was tasked with planning a week-long celebration in Rome, I thought maybe this is my chance. Maybe if I create the perfect event, they'll finally see me for who I am. Not just the girl from humble beginnings, not just the party planner, but someone worthy of their name. I threw myself into it. A Michelin-starred dinner overlooking the Colosseum, private tours of the Vatican luxury villas in Tuscany. I leveraged every contact I had, used my own company's credit line when payments were delayed. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Sean would explain the strange financial documents I glimpsed on his laptop. Investments gone wrong, mortgaged properties, maxed out lines of credit, the cracks in their perfect facade. And then came the message. That morning, before our flight to Rome, Sean was in the shower when his phone buzzed. I had never checked his phone before. I believed in trust, but something made me look. Can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet? The sender, Vanessa Hughes, his college girlfriend, the woman his parents had always wanted for him, the woman they never stopped comparing me to. My stomach turned cold as I opened the thread. Months of messages, plans made, futures discussed, a baby, their baby, 4 months along. I took screenshots. I sent them to myself. Then I deleted the evidence and plastered on a smile as I boarded the plane with him and his family. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. I wanted him to hang himself with the very rope he and Eleanor had braided so carefully. And now, standing outside that restaurant in Rome with my humiliation still burning on my skin, I finally understood. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had planned it. The missing chair was no mistake, it was the final act of my erasure. But they underestimated me. Because while they thought they were writing me out of their story, I had been quietly building my own, gathering proof, collecting every careless email, every hidden financial trail, every whisper of deceit. They wanted me small, invisible. Tonight I would show them just how dangerous it is to underestimate the woman you tried to erase. And as I sat in that little cafe across the street, espresso in hand, my phone glowing with possibility, I whispered to myself the words that had once been my curse but now felt like my salvation. Seems I'm not family, but maybe finally that was my freedom. The first night in Rome should have been magical. I had poured every ounce of myself into planning it, from the seating arrangements at a charming trattoria to the carefully chosen menu that blended tradition with elegance. I told myself that if I could make the week flawless, if I could make Eleanor's 70th birthday unforgettable, maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. But instead, I found myself pushed to the far end of the table, separated from Sean by his cousin and his aunt. Their laughter rose in waves, a tide of inside jokes and nostalgic stories of trips to Italy I had never been invited to. When I tried to join in, Melissa interrupted smoothly, her voice dripping with that practiced Caldwell condescension. "Oh, Anna," she said, almost laughing. "We've decided to go shopping tomorrow instead of the Vatican tour. It's just a little family tradition." I blinked, confused. Family shopping? That wasn't on the schedule I had spent months carefully coordinating. Eleanor leaned in, then her tone gentle but cutting. "You'd be bored, dear. Why don't you use the time to check on the birthday arrangements? That's your expertise, after all." Their words stung, but I smiled politely, hiding the humiliation that gnawed at me. My entire career had been built on anticipation, on planning for every detail, every variable. But what I had failed to plan for was the deliberate cruelty of being erased not by accident, but by design. The pattern continued the next day. I woke to find Sean gone, his side of the bed already cold, a hastily scribbled note left behind about meeting his father for breakfast. The family disappeared for hours at a time, slipping away on impromptu excursions that somehow everyone knew about but me. When I entered the hotel lobby, conversations would die mid-sentence, their hushed whispers hanging in the air like smoke. By the third day, my isolation was complete. Dinner reservations had been mysteriously changed. Family friends appeared out of nowhere, old acquaintances who greeted the Caldwells warmly while giving me curious, assessing looks, as though they had already been told the ending of a story I hadn't realized I was trapped in. And then came the discovery. Sean had rushed out that morning, leaving his leather briefcase carelessly unlatched. I should have respected his privacy, that's what I told myself. But something inside me whispered, "Look." My fingers trembled as I flipped it open, scanning the documents inside. My heart stopped. Draft separation papers, dated 2 months earlier. A proposed settlement that offered me barely a fraction of what I was entitled to. And tucked among them the cruelest piece of all, a script. An actual script. I could barely breathe as I read the words written out for Sean's stage directions and all. How he would announce our mutual decision to separate, how it would be presented as amicable, how the family would rally around Eleanor, framing the timing of the announcement as unfortunate but necessary. And the setting, his mother's birthday dinner. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. I clutched the papers, my mind a blur of disbelief and fury. So this had been the plan all along. Not just a missing chair, not just subtle exclusions, but a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to erase me publicly with precision and cruelty. I took photos of every page, my hands shaking as I captured the evidence. When I placed the documents back exactly as I'd found them, I felt my world collapse around me. Yet in the ashes, something new stirred, something stronger. For the next few days, I wore my mask. I smiled as I approved floral arrangements, nodded as I inspected the restaurant, laughed politely at jokes meant to exclude me. But inside, I was no longer the woman desperate to belong. I was a strategist, gathering every thread of evidence, weaving a net they wouldn't see until it was too late. I found more than I expected. Bank statements tucked in folders showing massive withdrawals to offshore accounts. Email printouts discussing liquidations before the situation becomes public. A handwritten note from Eleanor herself scrawled with elegant disdain. "Once this unpleasantness with Anna is behind us, Vanessa will be welcomed back properly." The words carved into me like glass, my replacement, my erasure, and Sean, my husband, complicit in it all. Still, I played my role. Because I wanted them unguarded. I wanted them confident in their victory. The morning of Eleanor's birthday dawned bright, the Roman sun spilling gold across the Spanish steps. I slipped from bed early, moving silently so as not to disturb Sean. My reflection in the mirror startled me. I looked composed, polished, but my eyes told another story. They burned with something that was no longer grief. It was resolve. That afternoon, while printing final confirmations in the hotel business center, I overheard her voice. Eleanor's sharp, imperious tone cutting through the thin wall. "There will be 12 seats, not 13, she told someone firmly. "I don't care what the original reservation says. My son's wife will not be staying for the dinner. A family matter, you understand. No questions." I felt my blood run cold. So it was true. The missing seat wasn't an oversight, it was the centerpiece. My erasure staged and choreographed. I gathered my papers with trembling hands, but as I stepped into the elevator, a calmness washed over me. If this was the scene they wanted, I would rewrite the ending. I arrived at the restaurant early, as any good planner would. Aroma, perched high with its breathtaking view of the Colosseum, was a jewel. I inspected every detail, every candle flicker, every bloom of Eleanor's favorite white peonies. I smoothed place cards, adjusted champagne flutes, and confirmed the 7-course tasting menu. It was perfect. My final gift. My final performance. And then I made the call. A contingency I had quietly arranged, one that would give me the power to pull the rug out from under them at the moment of my choosing. In the world of elite event planning, relationships are everything. My name, my company, my reputation, they were the true keys to this kingdom. Not Eleanor's, not Sean's, mine. As I returned to the hotel to change, slipping into the midnight blue Valentino gown I had chosen for this night, I studied my reflection again. The woman staring back was not the same woman who had once begged for acceptance. Her spine was straighter, her eyes sharper. By the time I entered the hotel lobby to meet the family, they were already gathered. Eleanor resplendent in Chanel, dripping in diamonds. Melissa smirking as if she already knew tonight would be my undoing. And Sean, his gaze lingering on me for just a second too long, perhaps remembering what he once loved, or calculating how quickly he could discard me. Anna, darling, Eleanor said with mock warmth, air kissing my cheek. You look lovely. Her tone was sweet. Too sweet, like venom wrapped in sugar. The drive to the restaurant was filled with chatter I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I stared out the window at Rome glowing in the dusk, ancient and eternal. Empires had risen and fallen here. Tonight another would fall. The elevator doors opened onto the rooftop terrace, and for a moment even I had to catch my breath. The Colosseum stood illuminated against the night sky, the stars overhead like scattered diamonds. It was a scene meant for triumph, not for betrayal. But in a way, wasn't that what made it perfect? Eleanor entered first, greeted with applause from her assembled guests. One by one they drifted toward the large round table, 12 chairs, not 13. I walked slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the polished stone. And there it was, the empty space where my place card should have been. No chair, no setting, just absence. Is something wrong? Eleanor's voice carried just enough to silence the room. I met her gaze, my voice calm, though my heart thundered in my chest. There seems to be a mistake. My place setting is missing. Sean shifted in his chair, pretending to rise, pretending to care. That's odd, Melissa said, feigning surprise. Did someone count wrong? Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps a miscommunication with the staff. And then Sean delivered his line, the line from the script I had read in his briefcase. He chuckled. God, he actually chuckled and said, Oops, guess we miscounted. Laughter rippled around the table, the sound of wolves circling prey. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Instead, I let silence stretch long enough to cut through their amusement, and then I said it. Seems I'm not family. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ripples spread across every face. Eleanor's smile faltered. Melissa blinked. Sean's expression wavered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I straightened my shoulders, turned on my heel, and walked out. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. I didn't look back, because they thought this was my ending. But I knew it was only the beginning. The night air wrapped around me as I stepped out of the restaurant, my heels striking against the cobblestones of the Roman street. My chest still burned from the humiliation, but beneath that fire, there was something sharper clarity. For the first time in years, I saw the truth, without filters, without excuses. They hadn't just excluded me. They had plotted my erasure, written it into their script, rehearsed it like a play. And I, the woman who built a life planning every detail down to the angle of a champagne flute, had finally accepted the role they wanted me to play. Not the discarded wife, not the humiliated outsider, but the director. Across the street, a small cafe still glowed warmly, its tables scattered with late-night couples sipping espresso and wine. I chose the one closest to the window where I could see the restaurant's grand entrance, a stage where their carefully planned performance would soon collapse. The waiter approached, and in my shaky Italian, I ordered a single espresso. As he walked away, I pulled out my phone and opened the event management app I had used to build my company, and ironically, the very weapon they had handed me by trusting me with every detail of this trip. The first email had already been drafted days earlier, saved quietly in my drafts folder under the name Contingency. I clicked send. The message flew across the Atlantic straight to Marco, the restaurant manager. Attached was proof of my authority as the event coordinator, along with the authorization to reverse payments. The second message went to the vineyard scheduled for the following day's lunch. The third to the private Vatican guide. The fourth to the yacht captain. One by one, I dismantled their week in Rome, brick by brick, arrangement by arrangement. Each deposit I had fronted with my own company's credit line flowed back into my accounts like blood returning to frozen veins. By the time I finished my espresso, I had unraveled years of carefully crafted appearances. My phone buzzed, a message from Sean. "Anna, where are you? Stop being childish and come back." Another followed seconds later. "Mother is upset, you're embarrassing yourself." The audacity almost made me laugh. Myself. Was that really what he thought this was about? I ignored them both. Instead, I slipped a bill under my saucer, stood and crossed the street again. This time I didn't walk through the grand entrance. I used the service door, the one I had memorized earlier during my inspections. Marco met me near the kitchen, his brow furrowed with concern. "Signora Caldwell," he said quietly, "are you certain about this? It is most unusual." I looked him squarely in the eye, my voice steady. "I am absolutely certain, and I appreciate your discretion." From my purse, I pulled the sealed envelope, signed papers, proof of payment reversals, and a clear withdrawal of my company's financial guarantee. The Caldwell name meant nothing here tonight. My name was the one on the contracts. My company was the one footing the bills. And without me, their empire of borrowed prestige collapsed. "When should I inform them?" Marco asked softly. "In 5 minutes," I replied, glancing toward the dining hall. "I'd like to observe from somewhere discreet." He led me to a small alcove near the kitchen entrance, a shadowed corner that offered the perfect vantage point. From here, I could see them all. Eleanor at the center, regal in her pearls, basking in the glow of attention. Richard beside her, already leaning back with the satisfied air of a man who believed the world would always bend in his favor. Melissa whispering in her husband's ear with that conspiratorial smirk. And Sean, my husband, sitting with his phone just inches from his hand, likely waiting for me to beg forgiveness to crawl back into the role of obedient accessory. I texted Marco a single word: "Proceed." From the alcove, I watched him approach Richard first, bending low to whisper with all the practiced diplomacy of a man used to dealing with difficult clients. Richard's expression shifted slowly from polite patience to confusion, then to alarm. He pulled out his wallet, fumbling for a card. Marco shook his head, showing him something on the restaurant's tablet. It spread across the table like a ripple in still water. Eleanor's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down, her posture stiffening. Melissa's laugh died in her throat. Thomas reached for his phone, his face paling as he realized the weight of what was happening. And Sean, my husband. His face drained of color, his hands tightening around his glass. Unlike the others, he knew exactly what this meant. He had seen the financial cracks, the desperate transfers, the brittle facade they had been clinging to. Without my silent support, without my credit lines and careful juggling, their empire couldn't hold. My phone buzzed again, a call from Sean this time. I answered. "Anna," he hissed, his voice low, urgent, laced with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I let silence stretch for a moment, then spoke softly, calmly. "Seems I'm not family, so I'm not responsible for family celebrations. You need to fix this right now," he demanded, panic breaking through his practiced calm. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? For my mother, for all of us." "I have exactly the idea, Sean. That's the point." There was a pause on the line. Then his tone shifted from fury to desperation. "Please, Anna, we can talk about this. I can explain about Vanessa, about the baby, about—" "I'm sure you can," I interrupted coldly. "The problem is I've already seen the financial statements, the offshore accounts, the drafts of our divorce. I know everything." His sharp inhale told me I had struck the nerve. He hadn't expected me to find those things. He hadn't expected me to be more meticulous than him. "You don't understand," he whispered, but I cut him off again. "I understand perfectly. You wanted a public humiliation. You wanted me erased. But tonight, Sean, I rewrote the script." I ended the call before he could answer. Back at the table, Eleanor was clutching at her diamond necklace, as if it could protect her, her regal poise cracked for the first time. Richard was arguing with Marco, his voice rising, his face reddening. Other diners were beginning to watch, their curious glances turning the Caldwell's humiliation into a spectacle. I stepped out from the shadows. The entire table froze when they saw me. 12 pairs of eyes locked on mine, some blazing with fury, others with disbelief. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice trembling with outrage. "How dare you ruin my birthday?" I smiled faintly, tilting my head. "I learned from the best, Eleanor. Isn't this what you planned for me? A public humiliation. An orchestrated exit. The only difference is, I changed the ending. Richard rose to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. This is outrageous. You had no right. I had every right, I countered, my voice cutting through his bluster. Every reservation, every contract, every payment, they were in my name, my company's name. I simply adjusted the plans. Melissa spat the words at me like venom. You'll regret this. When Sean divorces you, you'll walk away with nothing. I turned my gaze on Sean, then letting silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably under my stare. That's where you're wrong. I have copies of everything. The offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the fraudulent dealings. I wonder what the IRS will think when they see it. The color drained from his face completely. Around the table, the rest of them sat frozen, pale, horrified, their perfect facade crumbling under the weight of truth. And for the first time in years, I felt it. Not triumph, not vindication, but freedom. I turned away, leaving them in their chaos. As I walked out of the restaurant, I didn't look back. Not once. Because I knew the empire they had built on deception and cruelty had just begun to collapse, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice or throw a glass or cause a scene. I had only needed to reclaim the power they thought I didn't have. That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The next morning, Rome's golden light spilled across the Spanish steps as if the city itself were indifferent to the storm it had witnessed the night before. I woke in the suite I no longer shared with Sean, the sheets cold on his side of the bed. I had slipped back into the hotel quietly after the chaos packed only what was mine, and spent the night alone for the first time in years. The silence was strange. It was not heavy the way silence had been in our marriage, those wordless dinners, those car rides filled with nothing but his scrolling phone. This silence felt cleansing. I pulled the curtains wide and let the sun blind me for a moment. Below, tourists bustled through the square, cameras raised, laughter echoing. Life went on, and for the first time in a long while, so would mine. My phone, however, told a different story. Dozens of messages, missed calls. Sean, of course. His text swung wildly between fury and desperation. Anna, answer me right now. You've humiliated my mother. Do you even understand what you've done? We need to talk, please. Just meet me in the lobby. 20 minutes. My father's had a health scare because of you. Is that what you wanted? Please, Anna. Please, I'll explain everything. I scrolled through them slowly, my thumb hovering over delete before finally tossing the phone onto the bed. His panic wasn't my responsibility anymore. But I wasn't naive. I knew what came next. The Caldwells were not the kind of family to lick their wounds quietly. They would strike back. They would spin the story, cast me as the unstable wife, the vindictive outsider who tried to destroy them. I had to be ready. So I spent the morning in the hotel business center, cataloging everything I had collected, the screenshots from his phone, the drafts of divorce papers, the bank statements, the offshore transfers. I uploaded them to a secure drive my lawyer could access. For the first time, I felt the strange comfort of being armed not with weapons, but with truth. By afternoon, the fallout had begun. Word spread quickly through Rome's hospitality circuit. A family like the Caldwells could not stiff a Michelin-starred restaurant without whispers rippling through every concierge, every event planner, every vendor in the city. I overheard staff murmuring in Italian about the famous Americans who couldn't pay their bill. By evening, those whispers turned into questions, vendors calling me directly to ask if deposits were still secure, if guarantees remained valid. I told them the truth. I had withdrawn my name, my company's credit. If they wanted to continue business, they would need payment directly from the Caldwells. And payment, I suspected, was not something that came easily anymore. Sean's fury grew in tandem with the whispers. What are you doing? He texted again that night. You're sabotaging everything. My family's name. My career. Do you realize you're tying yourself to our downfall? But I wasn't. That was the thing he could never understand. I had already untied myself. My name, my business, my reputation, those were mine. His family had tried to drown me in their sinking ship, but I had stepped off the deck before the waterline rose. 2 days later, I boarded a plane home, alone. I upgraded myself to first class with the miles I had accumulated over years of arranging the Caldwells' endless travels. I sipped champagne at takeoff, staring out the window, as Rome shrank beneath me, and felt something unexpected: relief. When I landed in Boston, I didn't return to our Beacon Hill brownstone. I couldn't. That house had been more prison than home, filled with furniture. Eleanor had suggested art chosen to impress their circle, not me. Instead, I checked into a modest apartment I had quietly secured in my own name months earlier, a contingency I never truly believed I'd need until now. The first night in that apartment, surrounded by boxes and silence, I realized how little I had carried with me. Clothes, my jewelry, my books, a few pieces of art I had purchased myself. Everything else I left behind. Wedding gifts, furniture, things meant to symbolize permanence but now revealed as shackles. I didn't want them. Not one piece. And still the messages followed me. From Eleanor: "You've only proven what I always said, you were never one of us. Common, vindictive, pitiful." From Melissa: "You think you've won? Sean will destroy you in court. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." From Richard: "This is actionable. Our lawyers will be in touch." But the ones that cut deepest came from Sean. "Please, Anna, stop this. We can fix it. Vanessa doesn't mean what you think. It's complicated. The investors are panicking. Do you know what this means? I still love you. I always did." Lies and desperation tangled together. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because love that allows humiliation, love that thrives on deceit, love that hides a child from you, was it ever love at all? Days turned into weeks. The Boston Globe ran a short piece buried in the society section: "Investment Group Faces Inquiry." The Caldwell's name was not splashed across the front page, but the whispers spread quickly through Boston's elite. Friends grew scarce. Donors pulled away. Eleanor canceled her beloved charity gala, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. I watched from the sidelines, detached yet strangely fascinated. They had built an empire on perception, on appearances, and now, piece by piece, that empire was crumbling. Sean showed up at my apartment one rainy evening, his tailored suit wrinkled, his hair unkempt. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his family's unraveling had shrunk him. "You need to come home," he said as soon as I opened the door. "This has gone too far." "This is home now," I replied, stepping aside reluctantly to let him in. He paced my living room, running his hands through his hair. "The SEC is looking into father's accounts. 2 board members have resigned. Mother's losing her influence. Do you have any idea what this means?" "We need you, Anna." "No," I said quietly. "You need me. I don't need you." He froze, staring at me as though the words had physically struck him. "We're still married. My debts are your debts. If I go down, you go down with me." I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. "Not when I have proof you deliberately excluded me from financial decisions. Not when I have evidence of your offshore accounts, your fraud. My lawyer assures me I'm protected." His face cracked, then his polished mask falling away. He sank onto my couch, head in his hands. "I never wanted it to be like this," he muttered. I stood across from him, arms crossed. "What did you want Sean to marry me for my skills, to use me as your family's event planner until you could slip back to Vanessa? To discard me the moment I was no longer useful?" He lifted his head, eyes wet and desperate. "It wasn't like that in the beginning. I did love you, but not enough to stand up for me. Not enough to tell me about her. Not enough to protect me from your family." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the rain tapping against the window. Finally, I asked the question I had carried like a stone in my chest. "When is the baby due?" His eyes widened in shock. "How did you—" "4 months," I said flatly. "According to the messages I saw. Congratulations." He flinched. There was nothing left to hide. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow. "I'll give you whatever you want. Just hand over the documents, sign an NDA, name your price." I laughed then, a short, humorless sound that startled even me. "That's the problem, Sean. You never understood. I don't want your money. I want my freedom. I want the truth." His shoulders slumped, defeated. He looked around the apartment, smaller than our brownstone, but alive with the hum of independence of self. Perhaps he realized in that moment that he had lost me, not last week in Rome, not with Vanessa, but years ago when he chose silence over defense, convenience over love. When he left, I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my body trembling not from fear, but from release. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. because what came next would be mine. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe again, each day pulling more air into lungs I hadn't realized were so starved. I woke without the dread of calculating what insult I had to swallow to keep the peace. I ate when I was hungry, slept when the city went quiet, walked home in the rain without checking whether my hair, my clothes, my face lived up to the standards of a family whose eyes were scales instead of windows. It was not a perfect peace, nothing that follows an explosion ever is, but it was honest. The silence in my apartment was the kind that made room for my thoughts, not the kind that smothered them. My lawyer moved with steady professionalism, a kind of quiet that comforted me more than any grand gesture could. We filed what needed to be filed and locked what needed to be locked. Truth became both my shield and my compass. When the first reporter called fishing for the shape of a scandal, I said nothing, and everything all at once. No comment. This is a private matter. It was the most I had ever said and the least. Discretion was my inheritance from the life I had built without the Caldwells. I wasn't going to trade it now for temporary vindication or pitying press. Work kept me upright. Referrals multiplied in the strangest way, quietly at first, then with a hum. Couples and corporations who'd once spoken to me with the patronizing sweetness of people bartering for a discount began speaking with respect. I didn't have to explain the Rome incident. The industry already knew. The story that found me wasn't the scorned wife, but the planner who kept her head, kept the receipts, and walked away. My calendar filled, then overflowed. I hired 2 new assistants and doubled our retainer minimum, then raised it again. I bought more coffee and fewer apologies. Still, grief visited at odd hours, a polite ghost that tapped the glass of my life and asked to be let in. In the grocery store, a man leaning close to choose tomatoes made my body brace for a voice that would laugh at me in front of others. In a quiet corner of a bookstore, a woman's perfume. Eleanor's exact notes of iris and frost sent me upstairs to the bathroom to breathe into my hands until the sting passed. Healing didn't move in a straight line. It braided forward motion with old pain, then tied it off with small mercies. I learned to thank both. One morning in early spring, a thin white envelope appeared at my office. No return address, my name handwritten in familiar loops. Eleanor's handwriting had always looked like a verdict. Inside was a single card embossed with silver, a committee request. They wanted me to submit a proposal for a hospital gala. Her hospital. Her gala. It would be framed as a reconciliation, a stylish full circle. It wouldn't be one. I set the card down and watched the light move across it. Then I drafted a polite decline and sent it with the kind of smile that lives in a person's spine, not their lips. The investigation into the Caldwell Investment Group thickened the air of Boston for a while, that special heaviness that descends when people pretend not to know what they know. 2 board members resigned. Another went on sabbatical. A line appeared on a society page buried like a tooth in the back of the paper inquiry's irregularities concern. I read each sentence the way you examine a scar, not wishing it away, just confirming it exists. I did not celebrate. I made dinner. I returned emails. I watered the plant by my window and laughed softly when I realized I hadn't killed it. Sean called less often, than not at all. It wasn't silence so much as the sound of a tide going out. Once I passed him on Arlington Street in a rainstorm. He saw me, hesitated, then kept walking as if the rain had urged him forward with cold hands. I was wearing an old coat and carrying groceries in a canvas bag that was fraying at one handle. I remember worrying it would snap and spill oranges into the gutter. He was an old photograph, and I was a woman trying not to bruise fruit. The absurdity steadied me. Vanessa's pregnancy became a fact instead of a secret. I did not search photos. I did not count months on my fingers. When thoughts drifted toward her, I redirected them to my desk, my clients, the 1,000 small details that make a day inhabit itself. I did not hate her. I did not forgive her. I set her down where she belonged, outside my door. On a bright day in June, I took a meeting in a sunlit cafe with a musician and his fiancée who wanted a wedding on the Amalfi Coast. He was nervous, she was meticulous, and the way they touched each other's wrists when they disagreed was gentler than any apology. I listened to what they wanted, and then told them what they actually wanted, which is the truest thing a good planner can offer. When they left, I pulled out my calendar and saw a date I had circled 6 months earlier, without realizing I'd done it the anniversary of Eleanor's dinner. The air felt thin for a minute. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I booked my flight. Italy in July is a cathedral of heat. The sea breathes differently there, as if it has learned to inhale beauty without wasting any. I stood on a terrace that first afternoon the Mediterranean laid out like a secret, and checked the day's logistics with a calm that surprised me. Florals arriving at 3, musicians on the cliff walk-through at 5, kitchen tasting at 6:30, lights rigging before dusk. It was the kind of schedule that used to stretch me like thread pulled too tight. Now it fit my bones like a rhythm. I pressed my palms to the stone railing warm from the sun and felt my body answer back present. The rehearsal dinner was small 20 people who knew each other's childhoods so well that they did not need to perform adulthood. They clapped badly after a toast, and it was the loveliest sound. Afterward, when the caterer asked if I wanted to box up leftovers, I laughed and said yes, and ate standing in a kitchen with sleeves rolled up a fork, precariously balanced over a plate of lemon pasta that tasted like someone had taught the sun a new trick. Work had become in the quietest way a language that loved me back. On the morning of the wedding, I received a text from an unknown number. "We're in Positano for a few days. Mother says hello." It was Melissa. Silly of me to be surprised the wealthy treat Europe like an extra neighborhood. I stared at the message long enough to feel the old anger stir, then sink under its own weight. I typed, "Wishing you well," then deleted it, then set the phone face down and went to check on the ceremony chairs, all 32 of them, in a curved, careful crescent that would make the vows look like the sea itself had brought them there. The day unfolded like silk let down from a window. The groom cried first, then the bride. The musician's hands shook when he played the song he had written. The winter he knew he loved her, and 3 waiters swayed unconsciously in the back like reeds in wind. When the father of the bride took my hand to say thank you, I watched a room full of strangers be a family without needing to harm someone to prove it. I didn't cry. I just let the sight settle into me and make a place to live. After the final sparkler went out and the beach quieted, I stayed to watch the crew coil lights and fold tables. A young assistant, new bright as a coin, asked me how I'd learned to keep things moving when people start to panic. I thought of Rome of restaurant light on Eleanor's necklace of a missing chair. "You don't stop the panic," I told her. "You stand so still it has to go around you." She nodded, like I had told her where the stars hide in daylight. 2 days later, before flying home, I took a train to Rome. I hadn't meant to. It was a casual betrayal I committed against myself. "I'm only transferring here, I won't leave the station." But the city tugged me like an old bruise. I walked until I found the street without trying to find it, the way grief knows every turn. The restaurant looked the same from the outside. The sky above it did not. I didn't go in. Instead, I crossed to the same cafe and ordered an espresso from a waiter who could have been the grandson of the one who had brought me courage in a porcelain cup. I sat by the window and watched tourists blush at the bill lovers argue softly. A little boy refused to eat anything not shaped like a circle. Life's still so alive it almost hurt it. A woman my mother's age sat across from me, a lone wedding band glinting in the weak sun. She caught me looking and smiled, the kind of smile women give each other when they recognize a country on the other's face. We didn't speak. When she stood to leave, she touched the edge of my table with her fingers, a blessing that needed no religion. I flew back to Boston that night and slept on the plane with my cheek against the window, dreaming not of the Caldwells, but of lemons and ink-stained contracts and the click of a camera shutter in a hotel suite where no one would ever again decide my seat. When I woke, there was an email from my lawyer, final signatures, confirmed filings, complete divorce, absolute. I stared at the word final until it felt less like an ending and more like a floor I could stand on. Sean sent one last message a week later. It was short. I'm sorry for everything. It didn't soothe or sear. I didn't write back. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a road I built with my own hands, not a shortcut offered by a man who never walked beside me when the ground was rough. I wished him nothing, and I wished him peace. Both felt like forms of letting go. Sometimes at night I replay the scene in Rome, but differently now. Not the missing chair, not the laughter. I replay the moment I lifted my chin and walked away. I pay attention to my own footsteps, to the mercy in them. I think that's the part we don't teach girls enough, how to hear the sound of your leaving and know it is music. Dignity doesn't need a spotlight. It needs a door and your hand on the handle. If you're watching this and you've ever stood beside a table where your name should have been and wasn't, I want to tell you something I learned too late, and then exactly on time. You are not the chair they take from you. You are the room that becomes quieter and truer when you stand up. You are not the laugh that cuts you open. You are the breath that seals you back together. And you are not the story they wrote. You are the author who takes the pen from the person who only knows how to underline your absence and decides instead to write an ending that returns you to yourself. I'm not naive. There are still days I miss the ease of being taken care of, even when the cost was invisible and total. But I am building something slow and plain and honest. I make coffee in the morning and it tastes like a promise I finally kept to the girl who believed hard work could buy not respect, but freedom. I look out over a city that once made me feel small and see only the paths I chose. And when the phone rings, new clients, old friends, the wide web of people who build each other up instead of stacking chairs and calling it love, I answer with a voice that belongs entirely to me. If this story met you where you are hurting, stay a little while. Like this video so it finds the next person who needs a chair pulled up for them. Share it with someone learning their own shape after a long unkindness. Subscribe if you want more of these quiet victories, these hard-won freedoms, these reminders that revenge is sweetest when it tastes like self-respect. And tell me in the comments the moment you knew you were done asking for a place and started making one.